A very good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining with us today. It's almost 11 a.m., so I guess we can go ahead and start. I am Dr. Tushanti Pereira, and I am the Senior Treasurer for the Nutrition Society of One University of Sri Lanka. Today, we are proud to conduct our first virtual webinar on nutrition challenges in diet for type 2 diabetes management. And with great pleasure, I would like to introduce Dr. Eileen Kande, our speaker for today. Dr. Kande is a renowned dietitian working as the head of dietetics and nutrition department at the H&N Reliance Foundation Hospital, Mumbai since 2014. She has a wealth of knowledge practicing as a dietitian for years. She obtained her bachelor's degree in nutrition in 1996 and started working as a dietitian ever since. She received her doctorate in 2015 from the University of Mumbai in nutrition. She has a plethora of professional experience working in various platforms and forums related to nutrition and dietetics. Today, she will be talking to us about nutrition challenges in diet for type 2 diabetes management. The Nutrition Society always wanted to organize a platform to discuss the everyday challenges that we face with respect to diabetes. And this is with respect to the Diabetes Day that we commemorated a few weeks ago. So before our speaker begins, I'd like to kindly ask all the participants to mute your microphones, so there won't be any interruptions for Dr. Kande during her talk. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them to the chat box. So we will get a chance to discuss them at the end of the webinar. So the discussion session will be moderated by Ms. Thirini and Ms. Parami, who are Nutrition Society members, and we will have about 15 to 20 minutes discussion session given our time frame. And we are planning to wind up the webinar around 12:30 p.m. So without any further delay, I would like to welcome Dr. Kande, who is joining all the way from India. So over to you, Dr. Kande.
Thank you, Dr. Tushanti Pereira, and thank you, Kumari, for this invitation. It's really my proud privilege that, I have been invited by you. I have very fond memories of Sri Lanka because I had come there for an AICNU conference, and I was, staying at the Cinnamon Lake hotels. And during my stay in Sri Lanka, I visited the Kandy and visited so many beautiful places. So, and it really gave me such a good, vibe and a good impression that I would love to come there again and again. Although I cannot be there physically, I'm at least glad that I'm there and connecting with you all virtually. And I would want to further extend my, connection and my networking with you all, for days to come. So I would like to now share my screen and okay. If you stop sharing your screen,
yes,
I'll be able to continue. Yeah. So, and you need to let me know if you can see my.
You should be able to share it because I have made you a co-host. Yes. We can see your slides. Yes, very good.
Okay, fine. So. Of course, this is me, which you have given your kind introduction. Thank you. So today I'm going to be talking about nutrition challenges in type 2 diabetes. And I believe all of them here are already nutritionists. So I'm trying to talk about, the practical aspects with regards to the nutrition and challenges that we face on time to time in diabetes management. So yes, we have to expand our options and improve our choices for the patients with type 2 diabetes. So managing diabetes successfully and nutritional management involves First of all, managing diabetes involves food, exercise, and medication. And the challenge that we face here is the food, as to what a diabetic patient or diabetic person or person with diabetes should be eating. And this challenge, why do I say that managing diabetes successfully and food is a very big and an important challenge, is because of this reason. Now we know that the biggest challenge in nutrition is because when you eat food, food raises your blood sugar. Okay, so whether you are diabetic or you are not diabetic, when you eat something, it increases your blood sugar. And that is a major issue, that when you are trying to control somebody's blood pressure, blood sugar, who's already elevated, how do you decrease their blood sugar with the food? Okay, so that is one challenge. Of course, exercise and medication and balance of all these three are important for the blood sugars to be controlled. But first is the challenge is of the food, because food raises blood sugar. So diabetes facts. The food choices can make a difference in the blood glucose control. So you don't need special foods. The foods that are good for you are also good for everybody else. So whenever a person comes to me and they tell me I am diabetic, or what do I eat? So obviously the first thing we want to know is whether they're eating good foods, whether they're eating normal diet, or they're eating a diet that is not their basic traditional diet. Okay, so that is one of the aspects. Then I also ask them as to how much of food they consume, in like in a plate, whether your plate would contain your vegetables, it contains your bread, it contains your meats, it contains your fruits, it contains some kind of yogurt. So the plate method is what I ask them, because I need to know what they are eating. So we do a dietary recall. Now, the biggest challenge for a dietitian, when a patient is sent, maybe the patient is come to you from an endocrinologist, and as soon as a patient comes to you, they give you a referral and they say that the doctor has sent me to you to reduce my blood sugars or to take care of my diabetes. So, and sometimes the challenge with dietitians and nutritionists is that they have hardly 10 to 15 minutes with the patient, and there are a lot of patients waiting outside in the OPDs, especially in the very busy hospitals. Yes, if it is a private clinic, you can give a more time to the patient. But those challenges remain the same, because when you are talking to the patient, what you want to ask the patient is the dietary history of the patient, the blood sugar level of the patient. You need to see the HbA1c of the patient. And you also need to plan a diet quickly. So can you do it fast? Can you easily do a calculation? How will you do that? The easiest method to plan a diet is to keep your exchange list. Now, in India, we use something called the IFCT, that is the Indian Food Composition Table. I'm sure even if you Google it, and I'm sure some of you also must be using this, or maybe Sri Lanka has their own food composition tables. Now, these are very vast tables because they have so many ingredients, and they have a lot of calories, proteins, fats, and lot of ingredients. So if you actually go and look at the tables and plan a diet, it will not happen, and especially you can't do that in front of the patient. So there should be something called a ready reckoner that you keep. And this ready reckoner, what you do is you make a list of the foods that are commonly eaten in your area. So if you have a list ready with you, like grains, like rice, like wheat, like other millets, if you have those ready with you and you have the calorie, protein, and fat content, you have certain protein foods with you, you keep like an exchange list. I'm sure you all may have made your own exchange list. You can either use a ready-made exchange list, or you make your own exchange list so that you are able to plan the diet properly. Then what you have to remember is the the diet pyramid. When you know the diet pyramid, you have to remember what are the foods and where you have to place. So when I ask the patient what you are eating, in my mind I have the food groups, so I asked whether I have asked the cereals, that is all the grains. Then I have asked all the, after cereals is pulses. If I have asked about all the dals and lentils, after pulses is milk and milk products. So I ask about the milk, the cheese, the butter, the clarified fat. Then is the vegetables. So even in vegetables, we have divided the exchange list into vegetable A, vegetable B, and vegetable C. Now, what is a vegetable A and B? Mostly they're all green leaf vegetables or gourd vegetables, and vegetable C is a starchy vegetables. So we know that we restrict starchy vegetables sometimes for a diabetics. How much can we give? We do not completely avoid, but how much can you give? Then is your meat and meat products, so meat, fish, egg, all these products will come there. Then your fruits. So you ask about the fruits, and you ask about the fats, and you ask about the oil seeds. So this is how you make your exchange list. Make your own exchange list, because that's the best way, because you know what type of patients you are getting. And then you can use this exchange list to easily plan your diet. So what do? I divide the diet of the patient into 3 parts. Okay, one is the carbohydrates, one is the proteins, and one is the fat. Now, how much will you take from each? So if you divide it into 3 parts, they say 45 to 60%. What I do, and I prefer using about 50%, and based on the requirement of the patient. Now, if the patient is a type 2 diabetes with insulin resistance and with obesity, then I use even up to 45% carbohydrates. But if I get a type 2 diabetes, or if I get a patient who is diabetic but underweight, okay, and needs to put on some weight, and does not have, and his HbA1c is controlled, his blood sugars are controlled, then I give even up to 60% carbohydrates. Okay, what kind of carbohydrates? I will come to that. Then proteins. So proteins also, now although they say 15 to 20%, so what I do is I ask the patient. First of all, I review the patient, and I see if the patient is of a sedentary worker, or patient is a housemaker, does not have much activity to be done. Then I look at the weight of the patient, and I plan 1 gram per kg. So if it's a 55-year-old man, or is a 55-year-old 55 kgs woman, I give her about 55 grams of proteins. And obviously, when I give the fat, it is 20 to 35% based on the CVD risk. Now, patient who's already got a cardiac arrest, patient who's already got a CVD problem, patient who has already got a triglyceridemia problem, for them I do not give a high fat. In the sense, I have a range of 20 to 35%. So for those, I give 20% fat. But if a patient is free of all these things, then, and patient is maybe a younger patient who is very active, who's going to the gym, who's doing exercises, for them I give about 30 to 35%. So that is how I divide my carbohydrate, protein, and fat based on what my client or patient is. Okay, now I don't know whether you all can see the slide fully.
You can see the slides.
Yeah. Okay. Now, when I said that I give, for some patients I give 45% carbohydrates, and for some patients I give 60% carbohydrates based on the requirement of the patient. If it is a patient who's an athlete, or who's running, or who's doing, or who needs to put on weight, I give them a higher amount of carbs, provided their HbA1c is in a good range. Now, how do I decide what type of carbs to give these patients? So basically what I decide is that, first of all, I look at the dietary fiber, and we decide how much of total dietary fiber that the patient would be requiring. So for every 1,000 calories, we give, say, about 15 grams of dietary fiber, 10 to 15 grams of dietary fiber. So if a person requires about 2,000 calories, then we give about 30 to 35 grams of fiber. So fiber also depends upon the amount of calories that you're consuming. And when you choose a fiber, when you choose a carbohydrate, we choose a high fiber carbohydrate because we know the benefits of the high fiber carbohydrate. So what are the high fiber carbohydrates? We can choose the oats, okay, steel cut oats or whole grain cereals. We can use all bran cereals. We can use pulses which have got the skin intact, so whole pulses, whole grains, vegetables and fruits that are with the skin intact. So we do not use refined carbohydrates. Okay. Then there are many people who also follow different dietary patterns. So either they are following Mediterranean diet or a vegan diet, or if the patient has got problems of CVD, or the patient has got NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver is very common these days. For them, we ask them to follow a Mediterranean dietary approach or the DASH diet. Now, the DASH diet also is got very high in pulses, vegetarian proteins, fruits and vegetables, and nuts. So these are the dietary pattern. We choose the patient to what kind of diet we need to give that patient. So you have to choose your patient's diet, okay? Because all the diets will not suit everybody. So when you choose the diet, you look at the diet of the diet that is there. So if I'll give you a simple example for the DASH diet, if the DASH diet has got grains, vegetables, fruits, fat-free or low-fat milk products, lean meats, and it has got fats and oilseeds. So there are various diets that are available. So now, what is the obese diabetic challenges? So in an obese diabetic challenges, the major challenge, why we find it as a challenge, is because that diabetes is, I did not definitely purposely, enter into, when I started, I did not give an introduction to diabetes, or I did not give why is diabetes formed, because I know that you all are all already professionals. You all know the reasons for diabetes. You all know what are the causes of diabetes. So I felt it is better for me to give you a more practical approach for diabetes, and therefore I chose this way of giving you all the explanation. So what is the obesity challenges of diabetes? Is that a patient who is diabetic, either they have two problems. So either their body is secreting lesser insulin, and because of which their cells are not able to grasp in, or to pull in, or to absorb, or to take in the glucose from the bloodstream. So that is one problem. The other problem is, because they are obese, they have got adipose tissues around their cells, and they have got something called an insulin resistance, because there are no receptors for the insulin. Remember the lock and key. So what is a challenge for a diabetic obesity patient is that they may be having both. They may be also having low insulin levels, plus they may be having a insulin resistance. Secondly, there are diabetic patients who have enough of insulin, but they have insulin resistance. So for those patients, it is a different type of an approach. But overall, why we say that it is a challenge is because they have a BMI of more than 25 kgs per meter square. And when they have their BMI more than that, we tell them that at least reducing their weight to 5 to 10% of their initial body weight will help them improve their insulin sensitivity, and hence it will give a better glycemic control. It will also improve their blood pressure and their lipid levels. So because when we get people with 100, 120 kgs, 150 kgs, they feel that they come like as if they have fought a lost battle, that yes, I have tried weight loss many times, but it is not happening, and I have not been able to lose my weight, and I have tried everything, but now I have given up. So you have to convince them and tell them that you need not lose all the weight at one shot. What you can do is give them a goal of 5 kgs. So and tell them that we will not lose 10, 20 kgs at, we won't keep that goal. We'll keep a 5 kg goal. Once you lose your 5 kgs, then we will set up a next goal. So when you give them a small goal, they are more happier to comply to the diet. And then when they start seeing themselves lose weight, that's when they feel that, yes, I can do it. So give them a small goal, 5 to 10% of the initial weight, and they get encouraged to lose more amount of weight. So what is the nutritional management of the hyperglycemia and type 2 diabetes is, first, when the patient comes to you have to do the clinical assessment. I do not know if Sri Lanka has registered dietitians or they have a registered dietitian body, but we in India do have. All over the world also there is a system for registration. So we generally tell that, because these days there are so many courses available and so many people doing all these small term courses, and they all call themselves dietitians. So we tell our patients that you go to a genuine dietitian who is qualified to treat you. So that is how we call them registered dietitians. And then we also initiate behavioral changes. Okay, so losing weight is not only about diet, but the challenge is to make them change their behavior, their modification. So what they do is, they wake up in the morning and they have like a bowl full of a grain. So the grain could be a rice porridge, or there could be any other items made out of grains. And then again in the afternoon they eat again after 2 hours, and they have lots of grains. So what happens is there's an imbalance, and this is what you have to check. You have to see what are they eating. Then also you have to provide them counseling on a day-to-day basis, on a regular basis, and you have to see their values, their beliefs, and their goals. Okay, and also you have to continue their behavioral intervention, and sometimes the doctors may also prescribe medication, because what happens is the patients often say that, I don't want to take medications, I don't want to take insulin. They are a little afraid. They think that if they start taking insulin, they'll have to take insulin for life, and the body will, they come to me with dialogue saying that, yeah, my body will get used to the insulin, and so then I will not be able to live without insulin. So there is a way in which we counsel those patients, and we tell them that, first we'll try to lose weight. Whatever medication that has been given to you, you can start it for now, and automatically even the levels of medications that they are using will start reducing. So even if they're using OHAs, that also will start reducing, and only by a diet therapy they will be able to control their blood sugars. Okay, then you should also explain to them that, yeah, if your HbA1c is 8 or 9, then we should at least reduce the HbA1c in the next 3 months to another 1-2%, and come down to at least below 6.5%. Okay, so what are the properties of a dietary intervention? One is that the dietary intervention is where you have to see is that the micronutrients are important. You can try a Mediterranean diet, you can try the alternative diet like a vegetarian diet. In India, we have a lot of people who are vegetarian, the DASH diets. There are many diets. So if you look at this list, there are like Weight Watchers diet, Orange diet, Zone diet, Atkins diet, Power plant diet. Now, whatever diet the people are going to follow, the main thumb rule is that it has to have a balance of every nutrient. So when a patient is eating, I tell them, ask yourself that what are you eating? Are you eating carbohydrate? Are you eating proteins? Are you eating vitamins or fat? Don't look at the item. Don't look whether this is a idli or this is a dosa or this is a porridge or this is a roti. You look at what is the nutrient of the content of the diet, and then you start consuming the food. Okay, so what are the targets, strategies for the type 2 diabetic is, one is, first of all, it is important to identify the patient at a pre-diabetes level. Now, if you know that when a patient comes to you, say first for weight loss, okay, and this patient is not diabetic, patient has never had a sugar problem, but would you ask the patient a certain question to see whether he's pre-diabetic or whether he's prone to be pre-diabetic? Yes, you will. So what is the most important question that you will ask? You will ask the patient, is there any family history of diabetes? So if he says yes, that there is a family history of diabetes, some say yes, both my parents are diabetic and I am obese. So what you know that this patient is highly possible that in the next 2 years, 3 years or 5 years, he'll come to you with a high blood sugar. Okay. So now it is your duty to tell him that he has to prevent it, because if his already body is used to eating and if he's used to having that sugar cravings, he wants to eat a lot of sweet foods, he's eating a lot of junk foods outside, that's when you can say that you can prevent the diabetes, not when you get it and then come to you. So prevention of diabetes is very important. Then you find out, so in the pre-diabetic state itself, you do a weight loss program for him. You also explain to him of the portion control. Okay, so he's saying, no, I'm not diabetic, my parents are diabetic. But if your parents are diabetic, there could be highly possible that you could also become diabetic. So now you try to reduce your weight and try to see how much of portions you're eating. So suppose you're eating, say, a burger which has got a big portion and it has got more of carbs and fat, you try to reduce it to half. Try to reduce it to the smaller quantities. Try to make the quantity small. Try to change the bread. So if you're using a refined refined wheat flour bread, like a whole purpose bread, we call it maida here. If you're using that bread, then you change it to whole grain bread. You use unrefined rice, or you use unrefined wheat, so that your portions are controlled, your glycemic index are reduced, and then you also explain to him that now you can start increasing your activity pattern. Okay, so that you first of all you lose weight also, and then you do not keep your body at a risk of getting diabetes. So these candidates are the at the best stage in which you can prevent diabetes. This is what we call as a prevention of diabetes. Then comes to the early type 2 diabetes. Now, who's an early type 2 diabetes? A person who has already been pre-diabetic, maybe for many years, and maybe he has controlled his levels, maybe he has not controlled his blood sugar levels. But this patient who has been pre-diabetic since many years, and he is now for the first time he's detected with type 2 diabetes. These people are very highly able to achieve a remission. Now, what is a remission or a reversal? Okay, so when we say that patients come to me and they ask me, I have heard that diabetes is not curable. Is it true that diabetes is not curable? So at that time, we know that diabetes does not have a cure, but diabetes has a the important thing of diabetes is, one is control and second is reversal. Now, these people who come in the early stages of type 2 diabetes, for them it is possible to have a reversal. Okay, for them it is possible to have a good control, and then they feel that, okay, I'm not taking any OHAs, I am not taking any insulin, and my sugars are good control, my weight is also good. So those are the candidates who are type 2 diabetics, but they have a very good control, and therefore we said that they are reversal because they may be producing very little insulin in their body. Okay, and that insulin itself is more than enough for the amount of carbohydrates that they're eating. So now what happens, if you increase the amount of carbohydrates that you eat, you will require more insulin. So automatically an early type 2 diabetics, if he decreases his carbohydrates and he has little insulin, it is more than enough to keep his blood sugars in good control. Okay, then the other category is the not on insulin. Okay, so who's not on insulin? So these are the people who are on OHAs, the oral hypoglycemic drugs. Now, these people who are on OHAs, they are the candidates who will be having maybe a metformin or maybe a small drug which will be given to control their blood sugars. Now, these are the people who are at a very good this thing to come back to a pre-diabetic. See, they can go back to the previous level. Okay, so they can come back to the pre-diabetes level by having a good control, and they even their OHAs will start reducing, or they may be requiring only OHAs and their sugars are good control. They may not require insulin. Okay, so that is another level of diabetics where we ask them to lose weight, we ask them to keep a good control, we give them good glycemic index, low glycemic index foods, and we tell them that you are not on insulin, you are on OHA, and your blood sugar is in good control. So that is another category of diabetics. Then there's another category of a type 2 diabetic who for whom even maybe the patient may be on, the person may be on OHA, plus the person may be requiring a basal insulin. Okay, basal insulin. What is a basal insulin? A basal insulin is similar to that when you are given an insulin which works over 24 hours. So you may be on some OHAs in between, but that insulin that you're given is a single insulin or insulin that is working like a baseline, okay, which will keep your sugars in good control, and it will be enough for you to tolerate even that much amount of carbohydrate per meal. Then there's another level of requirement for the type 2 diabetes is where this person is taking a basal insulin, okay, but his sugars are still high. Okay, so that means what is happening is the basal insulin is not enough for him to sustain that level of sugar. So for him, he would need another bolus, basal plus bolus insulin. So his basal will be going on, plus before every meal, he will need to take one shot of a rapid acting insulin, which is a bolus insulin, which will help him manage that meal of his. Okay, so this is another type of type 2 diabetes. Now when you reach this stage, generally a remission or a reversal may not be possible. Okay, so mostly these people don't come back to the pre-diabetes level, right? So we cannot give them false hopes that yes, you have reached this stage, but we can reverse your diabetes, or we can give you a remission. Client or to your patient, you definitely have to tell them that you have to have a low glycemic index foods, and you should encourage them to eat a low glycemic index food. So what are the low glycemic index foods and what are the high glycemic index foods? So all your breads, your refined products, they all come under high glycemic index. Okay, so what is it with okay, you have to know your carbs. Okay, when I say that some of them have to do a carbohydrate counting, we usually do it for patients who are taking insulin. Okay, and why? Because you need that unit of insulin for that amount of carbohydrate. So how much insulin you require per carbohydrate, you have to know that. And when is a peak of the insulin? So that is in type 1 diabetes. That's a different way of explaining, but you have to know in each food how much of carbohydrates is present. So accordingly, you will be able to match your food with the insulin. Okay, so if you look, starches and breads have 15 grams of carbohydrates, fruits have about 15 grams of carbohydrates. So meats and fats do not have carbohydrates. Okay, now how will you also increase the glycemic index of the food, and what is the role of fiber? Because fiber has a satiety value. Okay, it decreases the amount of the way the food moves through the gut. Okay, it reduces the time of digestion. It is like having one piece of chocolate without a fiber and having a fruit with the fiber, which will digest faster. Of course, the chocolate will digest faster and it will peak up your insulin, your blood glucose levels. Whereas if you have a fiber-rich food, that will the digestion will be much slower and it will not pick up your the amount of blood sugars. It will increase. Okay, so you have to have about 30 to 35 grams of fiber, which is helpful in not only glycemia, it's also helpful in insulinemia and lipemia. Okay, and fiber also has phytosterols and there are different types of fiber. One is the soluble fiber and the insoluble fiber. Okay, so plant steroids and fibers are very important for a diabetic. So education for a patient who's on diabetes is very important. Nutrition counseling should be done from time to time. Remember, you cannot do all the nutrition counseling in one shot. Okay, so you have to break it up. So you have to call your patient from time to time for a follow-up, and each follow-up you have to explain one thing to the patient so that they keep on remembering, and you have to keep on reinforcing certain things so that they remember. Okay, now what I've already explained about the sugar challenge, but what is the sugar challenge that a diabetic would be facing? Because when they are not able to remove sugar from their diet, what are the alternatives that we can give them? So we can give them sugar sweeteners. Now these are sugar alcohols or non-nutritive sweeteners that are safe to be consumed within the daily intake. And the levels have been established by the Food and Drug Administration. So what are the different sweeteners that we can give them? So what happens is sugar gives us 4 grams per kilocalories per gram, but a nutritive sweetener will not give, but fructose will give. So fructose is available in all the fruits. So you cannot just give fructose thinking that fructose will not increase your blood sugars. Fructose will also increase your blood sugars. It does have a lower glycemic index to sucrose or starch, but it does also increase your lipid level. So remember, if a patient is a NAFLD patient and the patient has fatty liver, you do not give high fructose foods. Okay, you can give fruits to an extent that the patient will get the vitamins, minerals, and fiber from the fruit. But so the most famous question that is asked to me from every diabetic is, can I eat mangoes? Okay, so now how will I answer this question? Would my answer be same for all the diabetic patients? No, it would not be same. Now somebody who has come to me with a blood sugar or a HbA1c of say 5.8 or 6, and they tell me, can I eat mango? I say, surely you can eat mango. How much to eat? You can eat about 2 slices of mango per day. Okay, somebody who comes to me with an HbA1c of 9, 10, 11, and the patient asks me, can I have mangoes? For those people who are uncontrolled in diabetes, I will not tell them to have mangoes at that time. What I will advise them, I'll say, see, what you can do is first you decrease your blood sugars. Let us get a good control of your blood sugars, and then maybe you can include some of the very sweetened fruits like mangoes in your diet. So your guidance will be based on the type of patient that you get, on the type of his blood sugar that you get, and over and above, instead of just giving mangoes by itself, include it with another food that will change the glycemic load of that food. Okay, so you know that when you add a fat or you add a protein to your food with a high glycemic index, it will definitely have an impact on the glycemic load. So if you're having say a bowl full of mangoes, you can have also a bowl full of nuts along with it. So what happens is it does not peak the blood sugars, and then because of both of them, the glycemic load of it decreases or does not allow the blood sugar to peak and to fall down. It will just give a gradual increase of your blood sugar and gradual tapering of your blood sugar. So that is how you should explain to them that this is how you can consume your mangoes. Then talking back about nutritive sweeteners, what are the nutritive sweeteners available in the market? One is sorbitol, mannitol, xylitol, isomalt, lactitol, hydrogenated starch. There are so many available. What will you give the patients? Now my choice, what I generally give the patient is, I tell them that you have stevia leaves, or you have a stevia sweetener, because that's a natural sweetener. Or if they do not want to have stevia, then I tell them to have something called as a sucralose. Okay, sucralose is another extract from a natural sweetener, but it does not have calories and it does not increase the blood sugars. So the commercial ones that are available is Splenda or any other sucralose preparations. Now, what about the sugar alcohols like sorbitol, mannitol? They can also be consumed, but sometimes they cause diarrhea or they cause a gastric problem. They also cause sometimes a disturbance in your gut flora. So that's when you have to be careful when you depend. Now if somebody has come to you with a diabetes plus gastritis, you can't tell them that you can have mannitol or sorbitol, because then again they will have a gut flora problem. So for those people, you have to avoid giving any artificial sweeteners. Okay, so again I say that if you don't understand, first of all you have to understand the you have to understand why you're giving that particular sweetener, to whom you're giving, and what is his other medical condition. So if he has another medical condition, like I'll give you an example. If a pregnant woman comes to you and wants to have a sweetener, you shouldn't be giving aspartame based sweeteners, correct? Because of the phenylalanine. So you should know that because this has got phenylalanine, you cannot give. So can you of course you can give stevia and sucralose, but for them we tell them that a GDM patient, now GDM is another lecture by itself, I won't go into that. But talking about sweeteners itself, so you should be knowing whom you're giving the sweetener and for what reason, and what is his other medical condition. Whether his medical condition is going to interfere with it, he is already having a IBS problem, then you should not be giving certain kinds of like sugar alcohols. Okay, so these are some of the sweeteners that are available: saccharin, aspartame, asalfame, and sucralose. Okay, and of course stevia. And the FDA has allowed to have aspartame 2 to 4 grams, whereas the acceptable daily intake is about 50 mg per day. That's quite a lot, you know. So they ask me how much should I have. So usually 1 or 2 tablets or 1 or 2 drops is more than enough. So non-caloric sweeteners, these are basically sugar extracts. They also can be used. Now, you know, there are a lot of theories about diabetics who can eat sugars. Can a diabetic eat sugar? Can a diabetic have these things? Yes. It is not that that a person who's got diabetes should necessarily avoid sugars completely. You can give them sugars, but you have to see to it that they have a good control of their blood sugars. There's carbohydrates in the sugars accounted for, and it should be as per the WHO guidelines, which say 10% of your total daily energy intake should be from your sucrose. Okay, from your refined sugars. So but what I have seen is that when I have told the patient that you can take 10% of your daily requirement, that is 3 to 4 teaspoons per day, they tend to go overboard. Okay, then they feel, oh, my dietitian has allowed me to have sugar, so I can have. So then they'll have one ice cream, and they'll have one Pepsi, and they have one cola, and they'll have sugary drinks, and they go overboard. Okay, so the best thing I tell them is no sugar, because that's when they know that they don't have to have sugar, because for them calculations become a big problem. But you also get diabetics who are very well controlled. They know how much to take. Those people are the candidates whom you can advise to take sugar. So, you know, you get 2 types of people. One who are very particular. They write each and everything that they eat. They write their weight, they write their measurements, they bring an Excel sheet to you, and they keep it in front of you, and they say, this is my intake. Those are the people who you can do a little manipulation. But there are other people who their wives are behind them. The wives keep on complaining about them to me in the OPD, saying that, you know, I've been after them, but he hides and he eats this from me. He runs away and he eats it out with his friends, and he has a samosa outside, and he has a cold drink outside, and he has a sugarcane juice outside. So those are the people who are not the candidates to tell them that, okay, a little leeway is okay for you. Those are the people who have to be controlled and counseled differently. So remember one thing, everything is in your counseling. Everything is in what you speak to the client and how you speak to the client and what is the nature of the client, the attitude of the client. All that makes a difference. Okay. So what about alcohol? Most famous question, that can I have alcohol? How much alcohol can I have? Is it allowed for me? Mostly the wives, they come to me and they ask me this question. Or there are young children, okay, who are in college, who are teenagers, who have got a pre-diabetes already, or some people who are already taking OHAs and they want to take they want to have alcohol. So what should we do? Should we tell them, no, you completely stop alcohol because that's the best way to, manage? We cannot do that. So somebody who has been drinking alcohol since years together, you cannot tell him to suddenly stop drinking alcohol. So what you have to do is you have to give them the first thing you have to give them is a portion control. The second thing that you have to tell them is do not have alcohol on an empty stomach. Okay. Third thing you have to tell them is do not combine your alcohol and your diabetes medications. Okay. So these are the few aspects which you have to remember in mind when you're counseling about alcohol. If I'm going overboard my time, please let me know. I may not realize that I'm overshooting my time. Okay, so these are the different drinks. You have to know the caloric content of the alcohols that are present. Okay, in a fasting state, alcohol may cause hypoglycemia. Okay, and especially people who are using insulin secretagogues, those are OHAs, or who are on insulin. And alcohol is a source of energy but not converted into glucose, and it does affect with gluconeogenesis. Okay, so what is the limit? So drinks should be limited to 1 drink per day, or for 2 for men who are used to drinking. Okay, somebody who is drinking over the weekend, let them be at the weekend only. Somebody who is used to drinking every day, this is what you have to advise. Somebody who is not drinking at all, you have to tell them, please do not start drinking. Okay, so as I said, education is very important, and knowing your patient is important. It's not like one size fits all, like one instruction will fit for everybody. I get a lot of calls saying that, oh, my uncle and my chacha, my chachi and my so-and-so person is diabetic, give me a diabetic chart. It does not work like that, okay? Because you cannot give a diabetic chart to somebody whom you don't even know. You cannot just email a diabetic chart to somebody who you do not understand their blood sugars, who you do not understand their nature, who you do not understand their lifestyle. So for you to understand the lifestyle of the person who you are advising is very important, especially when these things are concerned. Okay, I won't go too much into it, otherwise I won't finish my lecture. So this is what about alcohol. Okay, limit yourself. Eat something before having have a snack before alcohol. Now what about eating outside? So should we tell them, no, now you are diabetic, now you completely stop eating outside? Okay, so this is a challenge, right? Students, what do they do? What do people do who are staying as PGs? What do people do who are going who are traveling so much? Can we tell them, no, now you, because you are a diabetic, you cannot eat outside food, you have to carry your tiffin from home every day? Or you have to tell the person who's in the hostel, oh, you're getting only carbohydrate rich foods, you're getting only refined foods, now you stop eating that and you have to have only home food? It is not possible. And even if you're eating at home, sometimes your family wants to eat outside. Sometimes you want to go for an outing. Sometimes there is a shadi, there's a wedding, there is something. So eating outside is inevitable. You cannot say that do not eat outside, or do not. You have to advise them how to choose their foods when they are eating outside, what to choose when they are eating outside, and how much to eat when you're eating outside. So that is the most important factor when you have to consider when a person who's a diabetic is eating outside. Okay, so the other important thing of eating outside or eating foods that are from outside is that if you have a good labeling system, try to read what the labels say, because sometimes there are hidden sugars, there are hidden salts, there are hidden fats. Okay, then read the labels. Okay, these are the various facts that will be given on the label: serving size, calories, nutrients, right? You compare their daily intake, their daily requirements. Okay, these are the certain ingredients. Also read the ingredients. Why? Because sometimes they may say fructose, or they may say that it does not contain sugar. Some advertisements will say, we are sugar free. Okay, but they will have fructose, they will have corn syrup, they will have something else. So what is it that is sugar free? Is it sucrose free, or is it all the sugar free? Some will say that mine has got is completely sugar free, but check whether it has got maltodextrins, whether maltodextrins is giving the carbohydrates or no, how much is the carbohydrates from maltodextrins. So all those things also have to be checked. So you need to know the ingredients of what is there. Okay, so what is your expected outcome is that one is you decrease your HbA1c by 1% in a newly diagnosed in type 2 diabetes. You decrease about 2% of a newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes and 1% of a type 1 diabetes, and decrease about 1% of the HbA1c in a person with type 2 diabetes. Decrease LDL cholesterol by 15 to 25 mgs in 3 to 6 months. So there is no magic wand. Okay, today you start, tomorrow it will happen. It takes 3 months because HbA1c is an average of 3 months, correct? Similarly, your lipid profile also will take some time. What are the protein challenges we have with our patients? So the protein challenge is that are they having adequate proteins? So you have to ask a history and see whether they are eating adequate proteins. Secondly is there are many people who I advise that when you're eating your food, especially diabetics, is do not eat your carbohydrates first. You eat your proteins first because that will bring about satiety. You will reach your protein goals as well as you'll be able to feel your blood sugars will be in a better control. So have your protein foods first and then have your fiber food second and then have your carbohydrates third. That's how you should be eating in that order. Okay, so high protein diets are not a recommended way. Okay, I will not read all this. Let's look at the fat challenge. Okay, now why we talk about fat as a challenge is because first of all, you will know that you have to choose a healthy fat. When you choose a healthy fat, what is the meaning of healthy fat? You have to avoid all trans fats as far as possible. They say as equal to 0. Okay, reduce your saturated fats to less than even 9 or 7%. Replace your your fats with a omega-3 fatty acid and a good ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. At least you have to have 2:1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. Okay, because you cannot take too much of PUFA and very little omega-6 omega-3, because that what will happen is it will increase the inflammatory markers. Okay, so that's how. Now what are the good fats? Olive oil, of course if you use cooking, then you have to use a pomace one. Avocados are good. It's a good snack as well, so it has got a lower carbohydrate content and a good healthy fat. So dietary fats, reduce saturated fat to less than 7%. Keep your cholesterol to less than 200 mgs. Okay, I'll try to finish by 12 something so that we have time for interaction.
So okay, you can take your time, no problem.
Yeah. No, because then, we can interact a little more. That's why I will, keep some time for interaction also. Now, blood pressure. We should not only focus on the blood sugar, because diabetes is not only going, that diabetes affects every part of your body. It affects your brain, it affects your heart, it affects your kidneys. Okay, and if your blood pressure is in good control, it is easy for you to manage the complications of diabetes. Okay, so the blood pressure, patients with diabetes should be treated to their systolic pressure of less than 130 and their diastolic should be less than around 80 mg. Okay, now weight management. This is a huge topic. I don't know how I will finish this, but I will try to tell you all at least the most important part of the weight management, because weight management is a very important aspect in the life of a diabetic. If you're able to manage the patient's weight, you will be able to manage his sugars, you'll be able to manage his blood pressure, you'll be able to manage his nephropathy, neuropathy, cardiovascular diseases, and everything else. So this is the stem and this is the root cause of the problems which the type 2 diabetics have to face. Okay, so one is that you have to balance. Okay, so in an overweight obese, the insulin resistance is very high. The moderate weight loss will help him improve his insulin resistance, and this is which we have seen with many patients. Okay, you can give them a low carb diet, okay? At the same time, you have to see that he does not go into a hypoglycemia. We'll talk about hypoglycemia a little later. And monitor his levels for his lipid, renal function, and you have to also check his sugars from time to time. So I tell them to keep a chart of their blood sugars, and they can manage that. Okay. Also look at their physical activities. So when I tell somebody, I ask somebody, it's really unbelievable, but I get many people like that. I tell them, what do you do the whole day? So they say that they are sitting in front of the computer. Either they are doing their online lectures, or they are working in an office, or they're working in a call center, and they are only working in front of the computer, and they sit continuously for 8 hours and more, or even 10 hours and even 12 hours. And I tell them, can you walk for 10 minutes? And they tell me, no, I don't have 10 minutes to walk. They do not even have 10 minutes to walk. And that is really surprising. That 10 minutes is a task that I have to tell them, that you get up and you walk for 10 minutes. Where do you walk? At least walk in your office, walk in your home, walk around your house. But do that for 10 minutes. So then, with a lot of bargain, I tell them, start walking. And then when they come to me for a follow-up, I ask them, have you started walking? They said, yes, I was able to walk for 10 minutes. It was not very difficult. Then I give them another challenge. I said, okay, can you walk for 10 minutes 2 times in the day? So then they said, okay, now I can try. If I could do it once, I can do it twice. Then they walk for 2 times in the day. Then I tell them, can you do it now for 3 times a day? And then they start walking 3 times a day. So that's how they achieve their physical activity. Now, somebody who has come to me and tells me, oh, I go every day in the morning for 45 minutes walk, and then I sit in front of the computer the whole day. So for those people, I tell them, do one thing. You continue with your 45 minutes walk. Okay. So for them, I tell them that you continue with your 45 minutes walk, and we will we will give you another challenge. So after they have started continuing their 45 minutes walk, then I give them some yoga challenge, or I give them something where they can be able to start walking or doing any other exercise. So first of all, I see their baseline level and then give them a different challenge. Just a minute. Okay, then is the people who are not able to get a control on their weight, or they are morbidly obese. Morbidly obese means they are 150 kgs, sometimes 200 kgs, and sometimes not necessarily they are so much weight, but they are even say 110 kgs, but they are not able to get a good metabolic control. So those are the people whom sometimes we have to advise a bariatric surgery. So these are people who we give up when they do undergo a bariatric surgery. They see that there's a good metabolic controls of their blood sugars, their lipid levels, their weight, and they have a better control. So those are the people who we give a bariatric. Now bariatric surgery is also another big topic which we can probably take it some other time. Okay, so there is an improved glycemic controls with with these people. So obesity, I have finished. Okay, now portion control is a key to manage your diabetes. Okay. So of course we often get these questions: which is greater effect on your blood sugars, 1 teaspoon of sugar or half cup of potatoes? So now potatoes, which have 15 grams of carbohydrates, while 1 teaspoon has only 4 grams of carbohydrates, therefore potato will have a higher effect. But at the same time, because there are many people who love to eat potatoes and they have potato in every meal, so what do I tell them? That do not combine two starchy foods. Like here we have something called a aloo paratha, that is a potato with a bread. So both are starchy foods, both are carbohydrate foods. So we have to tell them, remove one of the carbs and replace it with a protein. Okay, so that's how we tell them to do that. Okay. Now, what about supplementation? So, this is a very, very important topic because these days you get a supplement for every nutrient. Okay, you get a supplement for all the vitamins, minerals, plus there's a lot of things on diabetes supplementations. Now, when do you do a supplementation? When there is a deficiency. So, if you're unable to provide your nutrients from your diet, especially your micronutrients, that's when you give a supplementation. So, you you need not just over supplement a person, but when I take a dietary history of the patient and I tell them that you have to have say I ask them, do you have omega 3? Or I find out that in their diet they're not eating any food with omega 3. That's when I give them an omega 3 supplement. Then I also see that they are not getting any sunlight. They are sitting indoors. They are going by car to their office. They sit inside and they leave in the late night. So they have not been exposed to sunlight. Possibly they have a low vitamin D levels also. So that's when I give them a supplement. So all the supplements need to be given if there's a deficiency. Sometimes even in a condition that may require higher nutrients. Suppose like a skin problem or a hair loss problem, where those people require higher than normal recommended dietary allowances. For them, we give more vitamins. So we give them a higher dose. But to prescribe a micronutrient or to prescribe a vitamin, you have to first know the dosage. You have to know their levels, and you have to know for how long to give. These are the three main aspects when you are defining a supplement recommendation for a patient. Okay, many supplements, read the labels, read what they do, okay, and then you have to prescribe. So there are glycemic even supplements to reduce the blood sugars, but do it carefully because you need to understand the properties of the supplements before you actually prescribe. So similarly, there are either single, or you get multivitamins, or you get single nutrients. So here what I do is I get omega 3, I get vitamin C, I get B12, because here there are a lot of vegetarians who do not have any non-vegetarian food, and therefore they probably have a lot of B12 deficiencies. So we give them a B12 supplement. That's how we prescribe the supplement. Now, sodium is very important for your blood pressure, and we do advise to restrict sodium in the diet and the salt intake in the diet. Whichever salt they take, either the Himalayan pink salt or they take the sea salt, all salts contain sodium and they have to be restricted. Okay, there are a lot of young people facing diabetes, and these youth are either because one is they are predisposed because they have a hereditary problem. Secondly, have an environmental problem. Now, what I mean by environmental problem is, I'll give an example that they may be staying in a hostel, or they may not be staying in a hostel. They may be staying in their house also, but they are used to getting up late in the morning, 11, 12 o'clock. Then they don't want to have the home food. It is easier for them to call for a McDonald's burger, or to call a donut from outside, or to eat those kind of snacks. And they do this not once in a while, they do this every day. They don't like the hostel food, or they don't like their home food, and they have these apps where you can call in food easily. So they have a big portion of a burger with French fries and a Coke, and they stuff themselves fully, and then they eat only their next meal, which is almost similar. And this has been their lifestyle for years and years together. So what has happened is, they because they're already predisposed, because their parents may be diabetic, they're already predisposed to having the genetic and the hereditary issue of being prone to diabetes. They become pre-diabetic. They have a high cholesterol level, they have a high blood pressure level, and they are in a high risk. That's why we find people even at the age of 30, 35, they have a cardiac arrest, and they have neuropathy and nephropathy problems and all those issues. So these are the people who you have to counsel very well, because they are the people who you can control, and you have to explain to them the importance of this. Okay, we call them the newly diagnosed diabetics in the youth, but you have to understand their lifestyle. Okay, these are the energy requirements. Now something what we call it as a SMBG, that is a self monitoring of blood sugar. Okay, people who are taking insulin or who are doing a close monitoring, I'll tell you, like there are three types of cases here. Some are the people who have to go in for a surgery. So for them, we have to tell them that now your sugars have to be very well controlled. You have to monitor at home. That is a self monitoring. So you have to check your fasting blood sugar, you have to check your postprandial blood sugars, and you have to know how much of insulin to be given. So these are very close monitoring people. Of course, there are lots of devices available even for as an insulin pump and all those things. Those are in type 1 diabetes, but we won't speak about all that. Okay, so simple MNTs for self-management or skills for persons with diabetes is basic food and meal guidelines to be given for these patients. These people would require insulin, so or certain OHAs, they have to be monitored, and they have to write down closely. They have to keep a food diary and write down everything that they consume. Okay, so what are the essentials of self-monitoring blood glucose? They have to know their sources of carbohydrate, protein, fat. They have to understand the nutrition labels. They have to modify their fat intakes. We have to explain to them the alcohol guidelines. Okay, this is for self-monitoring. Okay, there's a lot to do with self-monitoring. Assessments, I already spoke that assessment is important, because till you do not understand your patient, you will not be able to give a proper diet for that patient. Okay, so diabetes assessment data, how will you do assessment? Now there are lots of tools available. Either you use the subjective global assessment, you do the NRS 2002, or you make your own ABCD where you find out the anthropometrical measurements of the patient, you find out the biochemistry measurement of the patient, you find out the clinical implications of the patients or the clinical signs and symptoms, and you do a diet. So these are the 4 aspects of a dietary self-assessment. So A, B, C, D. A is for anthropometry, B is for biochemical, C is for clinical, and D is for dietary. Okay, and F is also there, which is for functional or physical activity. Okay, so you eating, drinking, and sleeping and exercising time is very important, because sleep is a very important part of your circadian cycle. Okay, these are the basic strategies. Encourage, moderation is a key. You have to spread the nutritional intake throughout the day. You have to encourage physical activity. You have to decrease fat, and you have to monitor your blood sugars. Okay, meal plan for insulin. Carbohydrate counting is generally done for a person who's taking insulin, that is either type 1 diabetes or a type 2 who's taking insulin regularly. Okay, again, hypoglycemia is one of the complications that a diabetic may face, and these are the kind of information I give the patients. So I tell them to keep a card in their wallet or in their pocket saying that I am a diabetic, and if I go into hypoglycemia, this is what you should be giving me, and things like this, so that the person is, because hypoglycemia is more dangerous than hyperglycemia. It is very difficult to manage a hypo than to manage a hyperglycemia. Okay, nocturnal hypoglycemia is very, very common. You may have heard about the of course, how you'll treat hypoglycemia is you'll give a sugar, or you'll give something that's a simple ingested carbohydrate for quick recovery. Okay. Okay. Diabetic ketoacidosis is also a complication. Okay. Sick day guidelines. When you are sick, it's important to continue your medication. It's important to continue your food intake. If you're sick, you may change your nutrition, you may change what you eat, but at the same time, you have to keep a close monitoring. Okay, what are the causes of hyperglycemia? You may have heard about the Dawn phenomenon. Okay, it is there in the theory. The Somogyi effect, okay, where there's a rebound hypoglycemia. okay, because of the counter-regulatory hormones that are secreted. And so in these cases, you need to give a good proteins before bedtime so that they do not have a hyper and hypoglycemia. Okay. Again, this is a different state. There are different complications. Today I'm not going to be talking about the complications, but I will just run these slides through you, and I will show it to you so that you at least know that there are vascular complications, which is your heart diseases. You have to keep your HbA1c in targets. You can follow DASH diets here, Mediterranean diets here. Hyperlipidemia, bring your triglyceride, your cholesterol levels, and your LDL levels in good control. Okay, some of the instructions for nephropathy, especially patients who are got dual problems of kidney as well as diabetes. Those patients have to be treated differently. First, you have to account for the proteins that is present that needs to be given to the patient. After that, you calculate for your carbohydrates and your fats. Okay, that's how you treat a nephropathy. Okay, I'll keep these slides with the organizer so y'all can go through it whenever you want to. Retinopathy, and then, okay, gastroparesis. This is when you are dealing with complications in diabetes. Okay, these are all complications. Each complication is very big by itself, so it requires a large explanation. I will we can probably do that. Each complication takes another whole lecture. Okay, but your role as a dietitian is very important to achieve and maintain a desirable body weight, to provide relief from symptoms, to maintain your normal blood sugars, to prevent or minimize daily onset complications, and to improve your quality and health of life. Tell your patients what is their goals of their numbers. They should know their numbers very well. And there are challenges, but if we discuss it, we will be able to resolve the challenges. Okay, some of the myths that the diabetics would be having, especially the new diabetics, you have to explain to them that eating sugar does not cause diabetes, but what is the role of sugar and carbohydrates in the diabetes manifestation. Okay, again, diabetes can be cured or remission. I explained to you all how the pre-diabetic and the patients who are in the initial stages can get a cure, but can be reversed, or there could be a remission, but not for everybody. Okay, patients on insulin are more serious, so you have to explain to them what is the role of insulin and how insulin helps them to control their blood sugar and prevent any vascular. Okay, do not be careful when the patients are going on a very low carb diet also, because that could lead them to a hypoglycemia. Take their recall, divide their foods into 3 zones. That is a green zone, the yellow zone, and the red zone. So green zone is where they, we give them all the free foods, or where they can eat foods. We can tell them how much to eat. If they love certain foods, we can put them in yellow zone, which they can eat to a small extent, and which are an absolute no, you can put them in the red zone. So each patient can come out with their own zones. Okay, this is a sample diet where the person could be eating these type of foods. Okay, so what are the key changes? That is a reinforcement that it should be, the diet should be given only by a trained and qualified dietitian or a nutritionist. Okay, that is a very important approach. Refer to the for nutrition counseling. Follow eating guidelines, and these are some of the references which I have taken. Thank you very much. I hope I was in my time.
Hello.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Kande. I think our students will now start the discussion session. So I'm just giving them the opportunity to ask questions. We have received a lot of questions through chat. So let's get them one by one.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, I'm Thilini from the Nutrition Society of University of Coimbatore, Sri Lanka. So I think this webinar is a precious opportunity for all of us, and we are so lucky to hear your voice, madam. And I would like to offer our heartiest thanks to Dr. Aline Candy. And this is the right time to ask your live questions and get clarified. And we also have some questions in the chat box. We are going to go through that afterwards. So unmute your speaker and ask your questions.
Thilini,
Yes, madam.
You can
Yes,
read the
madam, we are
question.
going.
Yes,
Yes, madam, we have got some questions in the chat box. So we'll going to go through that. Madam, one asks, can diabetic patients follow intermittent fasting? Is there any impact on type 2 diabetic mellitus and intermittent fasting?
Okay, so it's like, as I said, that one size does not fit all. So a type 2 diabetic also, I remember I explained to you all the different situations in which a type 2 diabetic would be. Okay, so if a type 2 diabetic is taking insulin, those people cannot undergo an intermittent fasting, because if they have a high risk of going into a hypoglycemia. Okay, so that is one. Then there are type 2 diabetics who are obese, and they are if they fast, their blood sugars do not fall below the required levels. So those are the candidates who can do an intermittent fasting, but they have to keep a close monitoring of their blood sugars. So even when they are doing the intermittent fasting, they have to write down and do their blood sugars at time to time, so that they do not go into a hypoglycemia.
Okay, madam. We have another question from the chat box. What kind of nutrition advice can be given to a diabetic patient with complications like kidney diseases and hypertension?
So a person with kidney disease, also we are aware that CKD has got different stages. Okay, so there is stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5. Now, if a person is in the stage 1 or is a pre-dialysis patient, those patients, we need to give a protein restriction for those patients. Okay, so that there's no progression of their nephropathy. And secondly is, we have to give them also a restriction in their and we have to also keep a good control of their blood sugar, so that their kidneys do not go into a further nephropathy. Patients who are progressing into their nephropathy, we often find that their blood sugars become good. Okay, they do come to me saying that, oh, now my blood sugars are controlled, and now I do not have a problem of diabetes, because my sugars are well controlled. That means their nephropathy has been increasing. So the insulin generally is desensitized once it goes into the kidney, and because of which the functioning of the insulin that they have, if they are producing their own insulin, that may be enough for their sugars. So those are the candidates who may have a good control of blood sugars. But the thumb rule for a nephropathy patient is that keep the sugars controlled. Pre-dialysis patient, give restricted protein. Post-dialysis patient, give good amount of proteins. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, madam. We have another question. Nowadays, fat diets such as keto diets and Atkins diets are quite popular among people. And I have seen some articles saying that people with type 2 diabetes can slim down and lower their blood sugar levels with the keto diet. So, and people with type 2 diabetes lose weight and need less medication when they follow this kind of diet. So what are your thoughts on these claims? Is it safe for pre-diabetic or diabetic patient to follow such kind of diet?
So a keto diet is basically a high protein and a high fat diet. And it is not advisable for a patient who is diabetic to take a keto diet. Okay, so I personally do not give a keto diet to anybody, not even diabetic or non-diabetic patient. I generally only provide a balanced nutrition plan. There are many reasons for it. The first and foremost, the patient could go into a hypoglycemia with such a little amount of carbohydrates. Remember, keto diet does not give you more than 50 or 100 grams of carbohydrates, which may not be enough because your brain, your kidney, your eyes, your other organs, which are very essential organs, require sugar and require carbohydrates for their functioning. So it could damage these organs. It could damage a certain organs permanently. So therefore, in that cases, we do not give a keto diet. Secondly, a keto diet is not sustainable. Okay, so there are people who can take a keto diet for a little period of time and then they give it up. And then what happens? They come back to their original weight. The third thing is that if you are doing these kind of diets, you need a very close monitoring of your blood sugars and your other parameters, and therefore I preferably do not give a keto diet to any of my patients, nor an Atkins diet or nor any other diet which is very, very low in carbohydrates. So I give them a low carb diet, but up to 45% of carbohydrates, not below that.
Okay, madam. We have another question from the chat box. What is the danger of having aspartame during pregnancy? FDA has not limited aspartame for pregnant and lactating women, as I know.
So see, because of the phenylalanine, you must have heard of PKU, that is a phenylketonuria, and that is an inborn error of metabolism. So because of that, aspartame is contraindicated for the people who have got an inborn error of metabolism. And pregnant women, the child could be at a very high risk of having a PKU. So it can be prevented. So therefore, we do not give. If I have to ever give, I don't mind giving a stevia or giving a sucralose to a pregnant woman.
Okay, madam. We have one other question. What is the relationship between the number of insulin units and the amount of carbohydrate?
Yeah, so we generally, when we do a carbohydrate counting, we give for per unit of insulin, we give 15 grams of carbohydrates. So when you're giving, the more carbohydrates you give, the more is the insulin you require. Okay, so that is the relationship between carbs and your insulin. Now, when you do a carbohydrate counting, you have to have the adequate amount of insulin to use up that carbohydrate, because if you do not have adequate amount of insulin to use up that carbohydrate, you will have the carbohydrate will stay in your bloodstream. Okay, and that will cause hyperglycemia. So therefore you need to do that adjustment.
Okay, madam. Another question. What is the impact of finger millet on diabetic mellitus? And another question related with that, is healthy green smoothie with chia seed help to prevent from diabetes?
Yeah, so all millets have got carbohydrates, but they are also good in fiber. So they can be given, but you have to account for the carbohydrates. You cannot give unlimited. You have to do a portion control and you have to account for it. Chia seeds are good in omega-3 also. They also can be given, and smoothies can be given for diabetic, provided you have accounted for the carbohydrates that is present in.
Yes, madam, we have another few questions. Is semolina preferably for the diabetic patient? One question, and related to that, and another one, for diabetic patients, which is better, taking divided mini portions of meal or taking 3 meals?
Semolina is okay. It's a product of wheat. it has to be accounted for, because each 30 gram will give you 21 grams of carbohydrates. So you have to account for the semolina carbohydrates. And of course, the lesser the refined the grain is, the better it is.
Okay, thank you, madam. And if you have any questions from the audience, please ask your live questions.
So what you all can do is, yeah, in case if there are more questions also, you all can take my email address and you can email me. I will send you a reply if required.
Quick question, madam. Thank you very much. It's a very impressive presentation, and it's a full of knowledge. I think we should thank to IMB University who organized this very useful event. I think they should keep continue this one. So my question, if a person like in a kind of controlling diabetic, so when they take their meal, so when they take their blood sugar peaks, in which intervals we should check it? Is that after 1 hour or 2 hour intervals? And the peak should be, what should be the range?
So it is not the same for everybody. When we are doing close monitoring, usually we do that for type 1 diabetics, where you do a fasting blood sugar, you do a 2-hour postprandial, then you do a pre-meal, you do a post-meal. But for a type 2 diabetic who is again a type 2 diabetic who is taking insulin and whose blood sugars are more or less controlled, for them you don't need to do a close monitoring. But for somebody who has just started with taking insulin and we are still learning how much of insulin dosage to adjust their this thing with, for them we require a close monitoring. So we do a test at fasting, we do a test pre-meal, we do a test post-meal, and we do it for a few days and check how the blood sugar is behaving. Based on that, we decide how much of insulin the patient has to take and at what time the patient needs to eat the food.
Okay, madam, the connecting questions, like if it is a post-meal, just to check that what amount of carbohydrate we should give. So like after 1 hour, what should be the blood sugar? After 2 hours, what should be the blood sugar level?
So see, the aim and the goal of the blood sugar is to reach as normal as possible, correct? So we try to aim to see that it is at least, below, at least 126 after the meal.
Right, thank you very much.
So we usually have a range of 126 to 140.
Right, great, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
If there are any more questions, you are very welcome to ask.
Dr. Eileen, so would you be able to further explain the, that many people, especially the diabetes, I think you explained in the presentations regarding fruits, the consumption. Would you be able to little bit explain the whether it should be restricted or so you explained that we can enjoy the fruits. The amount is the problem. So would you be able to explain why it should be restricted? So the metabolic.
See, first of all, fruits is containing the sugar called fructose. Okay. Now we know that fructose is also a sugar that requires insulin. It is not that fructose does not require insulin. Only the metabolic pathway of fructose is different from sucrose. So even if we are giving fruits to a diabetic, we will have to account for the carbohydrates. Secondly is that if a person is an uncontrolled diabetic, those people require to have a more control, and therefore for those people we give fruits that have got a low glycemic index. So fruits such as pulpy fruits, which is banana, mango, they are high glycemic index fruits. We restrict those kinds of fruits. But fruits like oranges and other fruits, citrus fruits like berries, they are low glycemic index. Those fruits we give more easily. And even when fruits are concerned, I said, fruits give us fiber, it gives us vitamins, minerals. At the same time, when you are having, I advise the patients not to eat more than 2 fruits per day, because there are some people who say that they like fruits and they eat fruits, whenever they are hungry. So that is also not the right thing to do. The quantity has to be restricted. If it's a very severe diabetic, then we restrict to 1 or 2 fruits per day. That also all low glycemic index fruits.
Okay, thank you very much, because we love eating bananas, so that's why. So
it's banana is not a restricted fruit. If your HbA1c is good, if your blood sugar is good, then you can eat the banana. So what we tell them is, don't have a big banana, have the small banana, and along with the banana have some nuts, or have a paneer, or have a cottage cheese along with it, so that the glycemic load of it increases.
Hello, doctor. Yeah. I'm Parami Veerasinghe, representing the Nutrition Society. So, doctor, there's another question in the chat box. The question is, what sort of foods and activities you would recommend for a patient with fatty liver stage 2 due to diabetes mellitus?
Okay. So, basically, see, we first of all we ask them to reduce their weight. Secondly is that we restrict their carbohydrate intake so that they do not increase their fatty liver. And thirdly is that we give them foods which are anti-inflammatory, so that their fatty liver is reversed, as well as it does not progress. Kumari or Dr. Tushanti,
yes.
I have my OPD now,
Yes,
sure. If there are more questions, you all can email it to me. I have sent my email address. My WhatsApp number is also there. So if anybody has any more queries or questions, they can get in touch with me.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think we have a thank you a speech for you. Just a couple of minutes. Won't take long.
No problem. No problem.
Okay. Hello, doctor. Since we are running out of time, we are going to wind up our discussion session. So first of all, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to the doctor for giving very clear explanations for all of the problems. And also thank you for everyone who have actively participated for the discussion.